Japan is not running out of money, it is running out of workers. That sounds abstract at first, but it changes everything. When the number of workers starts shrinking, economic growth slows, public finances tighten, and everyday services become harder to maintain. Stores shorten hours, care becomes more expensive, labor gets harder to find, and the problem is bigger than Japan. Because Japan is not an exception, it is a preview. Most economic problems feel visible. A recession has headlines. Inflation shows up in prices. A banking crisis appears in markets. But demographic decline is slower. It works quietly. At first, nothing looks broken. The trains still run. The streets still function. The stores still open. But underneath that normality, the structure gets heavier. Because fewer workers must support more retirees. And once that ratio shifts far enough, the entire economy starts carrying more weight with less momentum. Every modern economy depends on a simple balance: workers produce, retirees consume, workers pay taxes, retirees draw pensions and healthcare. When there are many workers supporting a smaller retired population, the system feels manageable. When that balance reverses, the burden rises. And Japan is one of the clearest examples of what happens next. Its population is aging rapidly. Its working-age population has been shrinking for years. And that means the base supporting the economy becomes narrower over time. Japan matters because it reached this demographic phase earlier than most advanced economies. Birth rates fell, life expectancy rose, and immigration remained relatively limited compared with other large developed countries. That combination created a powerful long-term shift. More elderly people, fewer young workers, a smaller pipeline of future labor. This is why Japan is so important to watch, not because it is collapsing, but because it is adjusting to a future other countries may also enter. The first effect is not dramatic unemployment, it is scarcity. Labor becomes harder to find. Employers struggle to fill roles. Service sectors feel pressure. Care sectors become strained. Local businesses operate with thinner staffing. And unlike many economic problems, this cannot be solved simply by waiting. Because the issue is not temporary demand weakness, it is missing people. When there are fewer available workers, the economy cannot expand as easily. Some services become slower, others become more expensive, and some disappear altogether in less profitable regions. One of the biggest pressures falls on elder care, because aging populations do not only create more retirees, they also create more demand for labor-intensive services: nursing, home care, medical support, and community assistance. This is one of the hardest sectors to automate. A robot can help in a warehouse. Software can improve scheduling. Machines can increase manufacturing efficiency, but care still depends heavily on human presence. And that creates a structural mismatch. The demand for care rises at the same time the supply of working-age caregivers shrinks. That means higher costs, more pressure on families, and greater strain on public systems. Japan is often seen as the natural place for automation, and that makes sense. If workers are scarce, you improve productivity, you automate logistics, you redesign processes, you use robotics where possible. And Japan has done that. But automation has limits. It works best in repeatable, structured environments: factories, warehouses, processing systems. It works less well in areas that depend on flexibility, judgment, care, or trust. So automation helps relieve pressure, but it does not replace a shrinking population. It improves efficiency. It does not fully replace labor. When the worker base shrinks, growth becomes harder to generate. Not impossible, but structurally harder, because GDP growth usually comes from some combination of more workers, more productivity, or more capital efficiency. If one of those pillars, labor, weakens, the others have to work much harder. That makes growth slower and more fragile. So an aging society may remain wealthy, stable, and technologically advanced, while still struggling to generate momentum. This is why demographic decline can produce a strange economic feeling. The country still functions, but it feels heavier, more expensive to maintain, harder to accelerate, more dependent on efficiency than expansion. This is where demographics become a public finance problem. An aging society spends more on pensions, healthcare, elder support, and public services. At the same time, a smaller workforce means slower tax-based growth. So governments face a squeeze, more obligations, less labor-driven expansion. That does not automatically create a crisis, but it does reduce flexibility. It becomes harder to grow out of debt, harder to fund future promises, harder to expand services without raising pressure elsewhere. This is why demographic decline is not just a labor issue. It is a fiscal issue too. A common response is, why not bring in more workers? And in theory, immigration can offset labor shortages. But in practice, it is never just an economic variable. It affects housing, culture, politics, language, urban planning, and social systems. Japan has historically been cautious in this area, which means adjustment happens more through internal strain than rapid external replacement. That makes the transition slower, but also more visible. Longer working lives, later retirement, greater productivity pressure, more burden on younger cohorts. So the demographic problem does not disappear. It gets redistributed. Japan is first. It is not alone. Other countries are aging too. South Korea, Italy, Germany, China, and in different ways, many parts of the developed world. That is why Japan matters globally. It shows what happens when demographics stop being a background statistic and start becoming an economic force. This is not just about population. It is about the support structure beneath the economy. When that structure narrows, everything above it becomes harder to sustain. A shrinking workforce does not create one dramatic collapse. It creates persistent pressure on labor, on services, on budgets, on care, on growth. And because that pressure builds gradually, it can be underestimated for years. Japan reveals something important: the future economy will not be shaped only by technology, capital, or policy. It will also be shaped by demographics, by how many people are available to carry the system forward. Japan is running out of workers, and that makes it one of the clearest previews of the next economic era. Not an era defined only by inflation or innovation, but by age, dependency, and structural strain. The real question is no longer whether demographics matter. It is which countries will adapt first, and which will discover too late. That growth is harder when the people who power it begin to disappear.